In 1945, an American pilot flying over central China looked down and saw something that should not have been there. A white pyramid, nearly 1,000 feet tall, larger than anything in Egypt. The Chinese government said nothing about it for 60 years. That pyramid is one of over 400 in a 70-mile radius, and almost nobody in the Western world has ever heard of them. But China is just the beginning of tonight's story. Because on the floor of the Baltic Sea in Germany, 21 meters underwater, a marine geologist just stumbled upon a stone wall nearly a kilometer long. It is 10,000 years old. It is the oldest megastructure in Europe, older than Stonehenge by 5,000 years. And it was found completely by accident. Off the coast of France, divers confirmed a 7,000-year-old granite wall weighing 3,300 tons, 9 meters underwater, the largest prehistoric underwater construction ever found in France. In Bolivia, at nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, stone blocks cut from one of the hardest rocks on Earth feature 6-millimeter grooves and perfectly spaced drill holes. Made by a culture with no metal tools, no written language, no wheel. In Lebanon, 3 blocks of limestone weighing 800 tons each sit 7 meters above the ground, fitted so precisely that a razor blade cannot pass between the joints. The Romans, the greatest engineers of the ancient world, built their temple on top of these stones, but they never replicated them. They could not. In Peru, walls of granite show vitrification, a glassy surface produced only at temperatures exceeding 1100 degrees Celsius, temperatures that no known ancient technology could generate at this scale. And in southeastern Turkey, what we thought was one anomalous temple has turned out to be a network of at least 12 monumental sites, all older than agriculture, all sharing the same symbolic language, all revealing a level of sophistication that the textbooks said was impossible. Tonight we follow the stones they left behind, from the mountains of Lebanon to the depths of the Baltic Sea, from the jungles of the Amazon to a 2,000-year-old bronze computer pulled from a shipwreck by sponge divers. 14 chapters, 6 continents, and a pattern that will not break no matter how hard conventional science tries to explain it away. Something was here before us, and they built to last. If you enjoy our calm nighttime journeys, remember to like and subscribe. We highly encourage our community to discuss the video topics in the comments and react to other comments. It is the most fun when we share our thoughts. Now, let us begin. Tonight we are going back to a question we started in our last documentary. Last time, we asked whether we might not be the first civilization on this planet. We followed chemical whispers buried in the geological record. We traced anomalies in deep time. We stood inside a temple that predates agriculture and listened to the oldest stories humanity has ever told. But we left something out. We talked about what the rock remembers. Tonight we are going to talk about what the stone shows. Because scattered across 6 continents, from the mountains of Lebanon to the highlands of Bolivia to the floor of the Baltic Sea, there are structures that should not exist. Stones too heavy to move with any technology the builders supposedly possessed. Cuts too precise for the tools they supposedly had. Walls now resting under 30 feet of ocean on coastlines that have not been dry land for 10,000 years. And a pattern that keeps appearing no matter where you look. The same impossible engineering, the same impossible precision, the same impossible knowledge, on different continents, in different millennia, by cultures that supposedly never met. Tonight we follow the stones. And what they tell us is going to make everything we covered last time feel like just the beginning. Chapter 1. The stones that should not exist. In the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, roughly 65 kilometers east of Beirut, there is a place that has been considered sacred for longer than recorded history can account for. The Romans built a temple there. The Greeks worshipped there before them. The Phoenicians made offerings on the same ground centuries earlier. And beneath all of it, beneath the columns and the altars and the carved inscriptions left by empire after empire, there is something else, something older, something that none of those civilizations built, and something that none of them could explain. It is called the Trilithon of Baalbek. 3 colossal limestone blocks laid side by side in a retaining wall, roughly 7 meters above the ground. Each block is approximately 19 meters long, over 4 meters high, and 3.5 meters thick. Each one weighs somewhere between 750 and 800 metric tons. To put that number in perspective, the average passenger airplane weighs about 80 tons. Each of these 3 stones weighs the equivalent of 10 fully loaded airplanes, placed side by side, lifted onto a foundation wall, and fitted together with such precision that you cannot slide a razor blade between the joints. Beneath the trilithon sits a foundation layer of 24 additional blocks, each weighing approximately 350 tons. In most other archaeological contexts, those foundation stones alone would be the most impressive megaliths on the site. At Baalbek, they are just the platform, the base upon which the truly impossible stones were placed. And it gets stranger. In a quarry, roughly 800 meters southwest of the temple complex, 3 even larger stones remain partially cut from the bedrock. The most famous of these is called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. It weighs an estimated 1,000 tons. A second monolith, discovered nearby in the 1990s, weighs approximately 1,242 tons. And a third, found in 2014 by the German Archaeological Institute, weighs an estimated 1,650 tons. That is the weight of roughly 450 full-grown elephants contained in a single block of limestone. Whoever quarried these stones intended to move them. They did not finish. But the fact that they started, the fact that they cut a 1,650-ton block from solid rock and clearly planned to transport it 800 meters uphill to join the others, means they had a method. They believed it was possible, and based on the 3 trilithon stones already in place, they were right. Now here is the detail that changes the conversation. The Romans built their temple of Jupiter Baal directly on top of this megalithic platform. It was one of the largest temples in the entire Roman world. The 6 remaining columns of that temple still stand, each over 22 meters tall, and they are genuinely impressive. The Romans were the greatest engineers of the ancient world. They built roads and aqueducts and amphitheaters across 3 continents. Their concrete was so advanced that modern material scientists only figured out why it outlasts modern concrete 2 years ago. But the Romans did not build the megalithic platform beneath their temple. The cutting techniques are different. The jointing methods are different. The weathering patterns on the megalithic blocks are demonstrably older than the Roman construction above them. The Romans built on top of the platform because the platform was already there, and they never replicated the megalithic work beneath their feet. They could not. Whatever method was used to quarry, transport, and place 800-ton blocks with razor precision was already lost by the time Rome arrived. The greatest engineers of the ancient world looked at those stones and built on top of them because they could not match them. The largest modern mobile crane, the Liebherr LTM 11200, can lift roughly 1,200 tons under ideal conditions and at very short radius. Specialized heavy lift companies like Mammoet can manage 1,500 to 2,000 tons with custom gantry systems that take weeks to assemble. The trilithon blocks fall right at the extreme edge of what modern technology can handle, and the quarry stones exceed it. Someone moved these blocks with no steel, no hydraulics, no internal combustion engines, across 800 meters of rough terrain and up an incline, more than 2,000 years ago at minimum. Mainstream archaeology attributes the trilithon to the Roman construction period, roughly the 1st century before the Common Era through the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era. A graffito found at the site suggests the temple complex was nearing completion around 60 AD. But some researchers have pointed out that the megalithic foundation does not match the Roman work above it in style, technique, or apparent age. The debate over whether the platform predates the Roman period remains unresolved. What is not debated is the scale. No one disputes the weight. No one disputes the precision. No one disputes that these are among the largest worked stones in the history of our species. And Baalbek is not alone. 12,000 kilometers away, on the outskirts of the city of Cusco in Peru, at an elevation of roughly 3,700 meters, there is another wall that defies explanation. It is called Sacsayhuaman, and it is built from granite blocks weighing up to 200 tons, cut and fitted with such precision that not even a sheet of paper fits between the joints. No mortar was used. The stones interlock like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, with each block uniquely shaped to fit its neighbors. Some of the blocks have as many as 12 angles on a single face, and every angle fits perfectly against the adjoining stone. The detail that haunts engineers is this. At certain joints, the stone surfaces show vitrification, a glassy, smooth texture that is produced only when rock is heated to extreme temperatures, above 1100 degrees Celsius. Researchers including Jan-Peter de Jong and Jesus Gamarra have documented vitrified stonework at Sacsayhuaman, at Kenko, at Ollantaytambo, and at Machu Picchu. No known Incan technology could produce temperatures at this scale. The Inca had no forges capable of generating that heat across surfaces measured in square meters. Inca oral tradition says something extraordinary about Sacsayhuaman. It says the walls were not built by the Inca. They were built by the gods who came before. Modern archaeology dates the oldest portions of the site to the Quilca culture, roughly 900 AD. But the Inca themselves, the people who inherited the site and knew its stones better than anyone, insisted the megaliths were far older than their own civilization. Now consider what we are looking at. Baalbek in Lebanon, Sacsayhuaman in Peru, 12,000 kilometers apart. Different continents, different cultures, different millennia. And yet the engineering signature is eerily similar. Impossible weight, impossible precision, impossible jointing. Stones fitted so tightly that nothing penetrates the seams. Construction techniques that exceed the known capabilities of the builders to whom they are attributed. And in both cases, later civilizations built on top of or around these structures, without being able to replicate them. In our last documentary, we asked whether a previous civilization could have existed on Earth. We talked about chemical signatures in core samples, about isotopic ratios and carbon spikes. Those were whispers. Tonight we are looking at something louder, something you can walk up and touch, something that weighs 800 tons and sits 7 meters above the ground, with no satisfactory explanation for how it got there. The question that frames this entire documentary is simple. If separate ancient cultures on different continents, with no apparent contact, all built structures that defy the capabilities attributed to them, using techniques that share unsettling similarities, what is the simplest explanation? Baalbek and Sacsayhuaman are 12,000 kilometers apart. Different continents, different cultures, different millennia, and yet the engineering signature, the impossible precision, the impossible weight, the impossible joins, looks like it came from the same playbook. We are going to follow that playbook across 6 continents, and what we find is going to make you very uncomfortable. Starting with a site in Bolivia, at 12,800 feet, where someone cut stone with the precision of a machine shop and left the pieces scattered across the Altiplano like a jigsaw puzzle thrown from the sky. Chapter 2. The Machine Shop at the End of the World. High on the Altiplano of western Bolivia, near the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, at an altitude of 3,900 meters, there is a place that should not exist. The air is thin. Oxygen levels are roughly 40% lower than at sea level. Physical labor at this elevation is drastically harder. Trees do not grow here. There are no forests to supply wooden rollers. The nearest source of the hardest stone used in the construction is 90 kilometers away, across terrain with no roads and no rivers, navigable by anything large enough to carry the loads involved. And yet, someone built here, not a simple shelter, not a crude stone circle, something that looks, to modern engineers, like the output of a precision manufacturing facility. The place is called Pumapunku. It is part of the larger Tiwanaku archaeological complex, a site recognized by UNESCO as one of the most important in all of South America. The name Pumapunku means the door of the puma in the Aymara language, and what lies scattered across this windswept plateau has been baffling researchers for over a century. The foundations of Pumapunku were built from massive red sandstone blocks, some weighing up to 131 tons. These were quarried from a site roughly 10 kilometers away and transported across the Altiplano by methods that remain unexplained. There are no quarry marks consistent with known Tiwanaku tools. There is no evidence of the sledge or ramp infrastructure that would be required for blocks of this size. But the red sandstone foundations are not the real mystery. The real mystery is in the smaller blocks, the finishing pieces, the ones made from andesite. Andesite is a volcanic rock. It is one of the hardest natural stones on Earth. It ranks roughly 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, comparable to steel. It cannot be scratched with a copper tool. It cannot be easily shaped with a stone hammer. Shaping andesite with precision requires either extremely advanced, abrasive techniques or tools harder than the stone itself. The Tiwanaku civilization had neither metal tools of sufficient hardness nor any known mechanical advantage beyond human muscle. And yet the andesite blocks at Pumapunku feature perfectly straight cuts, clean right angles, uniform grooves exactly 6 millimeters wide, identically spaced drill holes running along the cuts, internal channels designed to receive metal clamps, and surfaces finished to a smoothness that modern engineers have, compared to the output of CNC machining or laser cutting. The most famous elements are the H-shaped blocks. These are standardized, interchangeable components. The same design repeated across multiple blocks with such consistency that any H block can be swapped with any other while maintaining level surfaces and flush joints. Think about what that implies. Standardization, interchangeability, quality control. These are concepts we associate with industrial manufacturing, with assembly lines and precision tooling and master templates. Not with a civilization that had no written language, no metal cutting tools, and no wheel. The H-blocks also feature internal right-angle cuts, channels and grooves that appear designed to receive T-shaped or I-shaped metal fasteners. Bronze and copper clamps have been found at the site, poured molten directly into these channels. The precision of the channels tells us something critical. The builders knew exactly where the clamps would go before the stone was cut. The entire assembly was planned in advance, designed as a system, not improvised, engineered. Alexey Vranich, an archaeologist who spent years studying the site, created three-dimensional reconstructions of Pumapunku using historic measurements and modern scanning technology. His work, published in collaboration with other researchers, confirmed that the site was a platform mound originally faced with these precision-cut blocks. The blocks were not randomly placed. They formed part of an architectural system with modular components designed to fit together in specific configurations, a system that was destroyed violently at some point in the past. Because the site is wrecked, the blocks lie scattered in disarray across the Altiplano, as though they were thrown there by an enormous force. Earthquake, flood, some catastrophic event that tore the structure apart and flung multi-ton blocks across the landscape. Three-dimensional reconstruction efforts, including new digital modeling projects as recently as 2024, are attempting to reassemble the puzzle. But the pieces are so scattered and so damaged by centuries of looting and repurposing that the original form of Pumapunku may never be fully recovered. Standard archaeological dating places the construction of Pumapunku in the Tiwanaku period, roughly 500 to 1000 AD. The Tiwanaku civilization was sophisticated. They developed raised field agriculture, advanced irrigation systems, and monumental architecture across a wide area. Their influence extended throughout the Andean highlands and beyond. But no evidence has been found of a labor force or an infrastructure on the scale needed to explain Puma Punku. No tool marks consistent with the precision observed. No quarry roads capable of supporting 130-ton loads across 90 kilometers of highland terrain. No workshops containing the debris you would expect from an industrial-scale stone-cutting operation. And then there is the altitude problem. At 12,800 feet, every physical task is harder. Muscles tire faster. Breathing is labored. The kind of sustained, precision work required to cut 6mm grooves and drill uniform holes in andesite, the kind of work that demands concentration and fine motor control over hours and days, is profoundly more difficult when your body is starved for oxygen. Modern construction crews working at high altitude rotate frequently and use supplemental oxygen. The builders of Puma Punku had neither option. The conventional explanation is that the Tiwanaku people achieved this with stone hammers, copper chisels, sand abrasion, and extraordinary patience. And perhaps they did. Stone is stone, and experimental archaeology has shown that andesite can be shaped with hammerstones and abrasive techniques given enough time and skill. The question is not whether it is theoretically possible. The question is whether the degree of precision, the uniformity of the cuts, the standardization of the components, the sheer scale of the logistical operation can be fully explained by the tools and methods attributed to the builders. Jean-Pierre Protzen of the University of California, Berkeley, and Stella Nair of UCLA spent years studying Tiwanaku and Inca stonework. Their research documented the remarkable capabilities of Andean stoneworkers and provided conventional explanations for many of the techniques observed. They deserve credit for rigorous fieldwork in extremely challenging conditions. But even within the conventional framework, Puma Punku stands apart. The precision of the H-blocks, the uniformity of the modular components, and the logistical challenge of transporting andesite from the Copacabana Peninsula across Lake Titicaca and up to the Altiplano remain difficult to fully account for. Now, here is the thread that connects everything. Machine precision cuts in one of the hardest rocks on Earth, at an altitude where you can barely breathe, with no metal tools and no written plans. The standard explanation is that the Tiwanaku people did this with stone hammers and determination. Maybe they did, but here is the problem. The same impossible precision, the same impossible logistics, the same impossible knowledge shows up somewhere else, on the other side of the planet, not in one place, in dozens, and the oldest of them was just found under the sea. Chapter 3: The World Beneath the Waves. In the fall of 2021, a marine geologist named Jacob Geersen was teaching a one-week field course at the University of Kiel in northern Germany. He and his students were aboard the research vessel Alcor, scanning the floor of the Baltic Sea in the Bay of Mecklenburg with a high-resolution echo sounder. Geersen was used to seeing rocks and boulders scattered across the seabed, glacial debris left behind when the ice retreated from northern Europe thousands of years ago. Random, chaotic, unremarkable. But on this day, the sonar showed something different. A line. A continuous line of stones stretching across the sea floor, 21 meters below the surface, running for nearly a full kilometer. The stones were not random, they were not chaotic, they were arranged in a deliberate, linear formation. Small stones connecting large boulders in a way that Geersen could not explain by any natural process he knew. He took the data to archaeologists. Their response changed everything. "You may have found something very significant," they told him. What Geersen had stumbled upon was the Blinker Wall. Named after a nearby underwater mound called Blinker Hill, It is a Stone Age megastructure consisting of 1,673 individual stones arranged side by side over a distance of 971 meters. The research was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2024. The data showed a construction that could not have been produced by glacial transport or ice push ridges. The arrangement was too methodical, too deliberate, too long. The Blinker Wall is at least 10,000 years old. It was built when this area was still dry land, before post-glacial sea level rise swallowed it between 8,600 and 8,000 years ago. It is the oldest confirmed human-built megastructure in Europe. Older than Stonehenge by roughly 5,000 years, older than the Egyptian pyramids by roughly 6,000 years. Archaeologists believe it was a driving lane, a structure designed to funnel reindeer herds toward a bottleneck where hunters could ambush them more effectively. Berit Eriksson, a prehistoric archaeologist at the University of Kiel who studies the early inhabitants of Northern Europe, was initially skeptical, but the evidence was compelling. When you chase reindeer, the animals follow these structures. They do not attempt to jump over them. The wall would have created an artificial corridor, channeling the herd toward a lakeshore or a second wall where hunters waited. But consider the implications. At the time this structure was built, the entire estimated population of Northern Europe was below 5,000 people. Building a kilometer-long stone wall, selecting and positioning over 1,600 individual stones in a deliberate sequence, required sustained, coordinated effort from a population that barely existed by our current estimates. This was not a simple pile of rocks. This was infrastructure, planned, executed, and maintained by people we describe as nomadic hunter-gatherers with no permanent settlements. And the Blinker Wall was found by accident, a teaching exercise, a routine sonar scan. No one was looking for it. No one expected it. The paper noted that similar structures likely exist elsewhere on the Baltic seabed, but would have been hidden by Holocene sediment cover or missed by older surveys that lacked the centimeter-scale resolution needed to detect them. In other words, there are probably more. We just have not pointed the right instruments at the right places yet. Now move from the Baltic to the Atlantic. In December 2025, marine archaeologists confirmed a discovery off the coast of Brittany in western France that pushed the story even further. Near the small island known as the Isle of Seine, at the westernmost tip of Brittany, divers found a massive stone wall resting 9 meters underwater. The discovery began with a geologist named Yves Fouquet, who was studying undersea depth charts created using advanced LiDAR-derived seafloor mapping. Off the coast of Seine, Fouquet noticed a 120-meter-long line blocking a submerged valley. It could not be natural. Between 2022 and 2024, 59 dives documented the structures. What the divers found was extraordinary. A wall averaging 20 meters wide and 2 meters high, with a total mass of approximately 3,300 tons of carefully stacked granite blocks. At regular intervals, large standing monoliths protruded from the wall in 2 parallel rows, remarkably similar to the famous menhirs found on land in Brittany, but significantly older. The monoliths, some reaching 1.7 meters in height, were placed on the bedrock before the wall was constructed around them. The stones were not thrown together. They were organized, planned, and executed by people with a clear understanding of structural engineering. The study was published in the International Journal of Nautical Archaeology in 2025. Dating placed the construction between 5,800 and 5,300 before the Common Era. That makes the Brittany megawall older than the famous Karnak stones on the mainland by several centuries. The researchers noted something remarkable. The technical skills and social organization required to extract, move, and erect blocks weighing several tons were comparable to those demonstrated by later megalithic cultures in the region. But this was earlier, centuries earlier. Whoever built this wall had the knowledge and the capability before the cultures we credit with starting the megalithic tradition in Western Europe. Archaeologist Ivan Paya observed that the wall was built by a very structured society. Whether they were the last indigenous maritime hunter-gatherers of the Mesolithic or the first Neolithic populations arriving from the east, they were far more organized and capable than previous models suggested. And then there is the legend. Brittany has a folk tradition about a drowned city west of the Bay of Douarnenez, not far from the discovery site. The city of Wise, swallowed by the sea in ancient times. Researchers stopped short of claiming the wall was evidence of a lost city, but they noted that memories of abandoned coastal landscapes, later submerged by rising seas, may have contributed to such stories across millennia. Real places, real flooding, real loss, filtered through 10,000 years of storytelling. Now cross the planet to the western Pacific. Off the southern coast of Yonaguni Island, the westernmost inhabited island of Japan, at a depth of 25 meters, sits a massive terraced stone structure, 150 meters long, 40 meters wide, 27 meters tall, flat platforms, right-angle edges, stepped terraces, what appear to be carved channels. The structure was discovered in 1986 by a diving instructor named Kihachiro Aratake, who was looking for hammerhead sharks and found something that looked like an underwater pyramid. Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist at the University of the Ryukyus, studied the Yonaguni monument for decades. He identified what he argued were quarry marks, carved faces, and architectural features that could not be explained by natural erosion alone. Robert Schoch, the same Yale-trained geologist who challenged the dating of the Great Sphinx, dove the site and concluded that while the features were intriguing, they could potentially be explained by natural fracturing of sandstone along geological planes. The debate remains unresolved after nearly 4 decades. But here is the critical point. If the Yonaguni monument is human-made, it was above water during the last ice age, before post-glacial sea level rise submerged it. That would make it potentially 10,000 years old or older. A monumental stone structure on a coastline that no longer exists, built by a civilization that left no other trace, hidden beneath 25 meters of Pacific Ocean for millennia. 3 structures, 3 bodies of water, 3 different continents, all submerged, all built when the ocean was lower, all found essentially by accident. The Baltic, the Atlantic, the Pacific. Everywhere we point a sonar or send a diver to a drowned coastline, we find things that should not be there. And the largest drowned landscape of them all, a landmass the size of England and Scotland combined, is only now being mapped. It is called Doggerland, and what is buried underneath it may rewrite European prehistory. Chapter 4. The Lost Continent You Can Almost See from England. During the last ice age, the North Sea did not exist. Where fishing trawlers now drag their nets across cold grey water, there was land. A vast landmass called Doggerland connected Britain to mainland Europe, stretching from what is now Norfolk to the Netherlands and beyond. It was not a narrow bridge, it was a country. Rivers cut through it. Lakes dotted the interior. Forests of birch and pine gave way to oak and elm as the climate warmed. Herds of deer and aurochs moved across its plains. And humans lived there, not for a few generations, for thousands of years. The name comes from the Dogger Bank, a large, shallow area in the North Sea, where British fishermen have been hauling up bones, antlers, and worked flint tools in their nets for centuries. For a long time, these finds were curiosities, oddities from an unknown past. It was not until the 20th century that geologists and archaeologists began to assemble the picture of what had been lost beneath the waves. The University of Bradford has been at the forefront of this work through its Submerged Landscapes Research Centre and the Lost Frontiers project, funded by the European Research Council. Using a combination of marine geophysics, seismic surveys, and sediment core analysis, researchers have mapped 188,000 square kilometers of seabed, reconstructing the topography of a world that vanished more than 7,000 years ago. In 2025, the team released an interactive simulation showing Doggerland's evolution from 20,000 years ago through its final submersion, and they are now using artificial intelligence to identify likely locations of ancient settlements based on terrain analysis. But the most extraordinary findings came in March 2026, when a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences transformed our understanding of Doggerland entirely. Led by the University of Warwick, the research used sedimentary ancient DNA, genetic traces extracted from mud and sand in marine cores, to reconstruct Doggerland's environment in unprecedented detail. The team analyzed 252 sediment samples from 41 cores, drilled along the course of a prehistoric river system called the Southern River. What they found overturned decades of assumptions. Temperate trees, oak, elm, hazel, were present in Doggerland more than 16,000 years ago. That is thousands of years earlier than forests became widespread across Britain or Northern Europe. The researchers even detected DNA from a tree genus, thought to have vanished from the region 400,000 years ago. This was not a frozen wasteland. This was not a bleak, windswept corridor between glaciers. Doggerland was a hospitable, biodiverse landscape, a refuge where plants, animals, and humans coexisted during and after the last ice age. The study provided the best evidence yet that Doggerland's wooded environment could have supported early Mesolithic communities long before the flooding that created the North Sea. The findings also revealed something remarkable about the end. Parts of Doggerland survived major flooding events, including the catastrophic Storegga tsunami that struck around 8,150 years ago. That tsunami was triggered by a massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway. A wall of water surged across the North Atlantic and into the shallow basin, where Doggerland's remaining islands struggled against the rising sea. But even after that catastrophe, some parts of the landscape remained above water as late as 7,000 years ago. Doggerland did not disappear in a single night. It drowned slowly, over millennia, with sudden violent episodes punctuating the long retreat. Imagine the people who lived there, generation after generation, watching the shoreline creep closer. Camps that their grandparents built now underwater, hunting grounds that their parents knew now shallow sea. Stories passed down about the land that used to be there, about the rivers that flowed through forests that no longer exist, about a home that the water took. Now multiply Doggerland by every continent on Earth. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, sea levels were approximately 120 meters lower than they are today. Continental shelves around the entire world were exposed as dry land. The coastlines of India extended far beyond their current positions. The vast Sunda Shelf connected Southeast Asia to Indonesia, forming a landmass called Sundaland that was larger than modern India. The continental shelves off Australia, the Americas, Africa, and every major landmass were all habitable terrain. These are precisely the places where civilizations tend to develop. River deltas, coastal plains, trade routes, along shorelines. If there was a sophisticated maritime culture during the Ice Age, as some researchers have hypothesized, this is where they would have lived. And this is exactly where we have not looked. Marine archaeology is in its infancy. The technology to systematically explore submerged continental shelves at scale has only existed for a few decades. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we do of the drowned coastlines of our own planet. The submerged landscapes of the Ice Age world represent the largest unexplored archaeological frontier on Earth. Thousands of square kilometers of terrain that was once dry, habitable coastal land sits beneath the waves, unexamined. And when we do look, even at places where we know to look, we find things that change everything. Consider the city of Thonis Heracleion. For centuries it was one of Egypt's greatest Mediterranean ports. Herodotus, the Greek historian, described it in the 5th century before the Common Era. Famous Greeks visited it. It was a hub of trade and worship and cultural exchange, and then it vanished. completely. For over 1,000 years, scholars debated whether Thonis Heraclean had ever existed at all. Some suggested it was a myth, a legend, an exaggeration of ancient writers. Then, in the year 2000, a team led by French marine archaeologist Franck Goddio found it, 6.5 kilometers off the Egyptian coast, under 10 meters of water and thick clay sediment, 4 miles offshore, 30 feet down, the whole time, a major city, described in historical texts, visited by famous people, lost so completely that its very existence was questioned. And it was right there the entire time. Nobody looked. In 2024 and 2025, ongoing excavations at Thonis Heraclean uncovered a Greek sanctuary dedicated to Aphrodite, a military garrison with Greek weapons, and new zones around the collapsed Temple of Amun. Artifacts from the site are now displayed in the Grand Egyptian Museum in Cairo, which opened in November 2025. The lesson is devastating in its simplicity. If we can lose a city that was described in writing, visited by historians, and located just 4 miles off a populated coast, what else have we lost? What lies beneath the other 99% of drowned coastlines that we have never searched? The ocean swallowed Doggerland. It swallowed Thonis Heraclean. It swallowed the Blinker Wall and the Brittany Megawall, and everything that stood on every coastline when the Ice Age ended. But the water only hid what was built at sea level. The things built on high ground, on mountaintops and plateaus and inland ridges, those survived. And they tell a story that is just as strange. Because on those high places, from Turkey to China to the jungles of Central America, we keep finding the same thing. Structures built with the same techniques, aligned to the same stars, by people who supposedly never spoke to each other. Chapter 5. The China no one talks about. When people think of ancient pyramids, they think of Egypt, maybe Mexico, maybe Peru. Almost nobody thinks of China. And that is strange, because within a 70-mile radius of the city of Xi'an in central China, there are over 400 pyramid-shaped structures. Some of them are enormous. The largest rival, the Great Pyramid of Giza, in base dimensions, and most of the world has never heard of them. These are not rock-cut monuments or natural formations. They are trapezoidal earthen mounds, constructed from compacted soil and clay, many of them covered in vegetation and farmland after centuries of neglect. Most are imperial tombs dating from the Han Dynasty, roughly 200 years before the Common Era through 200 years after. Others are older. The most famous belongs to Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, the man who built the Great Wall and whose tomb is guarded by the Terracotta Army, one of the most spectacular archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. But here is what makes the Xi'an pyramids unusual. Despite over 50 years of study, the tomb of Qin Shi Huang remains unopened. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed vast underground chambers, rivers of what may be liquid mercury, consistent with ancient Chinese descriptions of the tomb's interior, and a complex that extends far beyond what is visible on the surface. But excavation has been indefinitely delayed. The Chinese government has restricted access to many of the pyramid sites, and full-scale archaeological investigation of the majority of the 400-plus structures has never been conducted. In 1945, an American pilot named James Gausman was flying over the region when he reported seeing a massive white pyramid from the air. 2 years later, Colonel Maurice Sheehan corroborated the sighting, estimating the structure at nearly 1,000 feet tall, far taller than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Chinese authorities neither confirmed nor denied its existence for decades. Satellite imagery from the 2000s identified a massive mound near Xi'an that may correspond to the sighting, but its measured height appears significantly less than the pilot accounts suggested. Whether the discrepancy is due to erosion, vegetation cover, or exaggeration in the original reports remains unclear. Some researchers have noted that certain Xi'an pyramids appear to align with astronomical features. Though this research is disputed and limited by the access restrictions that make comprehensive survey work nearly impossible. What is not disputed is the scale. Over 400 monumental structures in a single region, representing a tradition of pyramid building that lasted centuries. A tradition that receives almost no attention in Western discussions of ancient engineering. But China is not the only East Asian surprise. Move southeast to the Korean peninsula, and you encounter a statistic that should be in every textbook on ancient civilizations but almost never is. South Korea contains an estimated 35,000 to 40,000 dolmens, more than any other country on Earth, more than all of Western Europe combined. Dolmens are megalithic structures, typically consisting of a massive capstone supported by upright stones, creating a table-like form. They are generally associated with burial practices and date from roughly 1,000 years before the Common Era in Korea. 3 major concentrations are found at Gochang, Hwasun, and Gangwon, and these clusters were collectively designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the year 2000. The question that is rarely asked is this: why here? What drove a civilization on the Korean peninsula to build more megalithic monuments per square kilometer than anywhere else on the planet? The labor investment alone is staggering. Each dolmen required the quarrying, transport, and placement of stones weighing anywhere from several tons to over 50 tons. Multiplied by 40,000, the total effort represents one of the largest sustained construction projects in the ancient world. And yet, it is barely discussed outside of Korean archaeology. The Korean dolmen tradition implies a large, organized, and motivated population with a deep connection to monumental stone architecture. A society that invested enormous resources in the construction of permanent stone monuments over centuries. This is not the behavior of scattered, isolated communities. This is the behavior of a culture with shared beliefs, coordinated labor, and a level of social organization that mirrors the megalithic cultures of Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas. And this brings us to the global dolmen mystery. Because dolmens do not just appear in Korea, they appear on every inhabited continent. Japan has them. India has thousands, concentrated on the Deccan Plateau. The Middle East has them. Western Europe has them. In Brittany, Ireland, Scandinavia, and the Iberian Peninsula, Africa has them. The Senegambian stone circles, over 1,000 megalithic circles spread across more than 100 kilometers of the Gambia and Senegal, represent one of the largest concentrations of stone monuments in Africa and are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The forms are strikingly similar, despite vast distances and no known contact between the cultures. A large capstone, upright supporting stones, a chamber or passage underneath. Orientation that often relates to the rising or setting sun or to specific seasonal alignments. Funerary goods placed inside, ritual significance attached to the site. Mainstream archaeology explains this as convergent evolution, independent invention driven by similar needs. Humans everywhere face death. Humans everywhere seek to honor the dead. Humans everywhere have access to stone. The dolmen form, a heavy capstone on uprights, is structurally efficient and symbolically powerful. It makes sense that multiple cultures would arrive at similar solutions independently, and that explanation is reasonable. But it does not explain everything. It explains the function. It does not explain the precision. It does not explain the shared astronomical orientations. It does not explain the remarkable similarity in construction techniques across cultures separated by oceans and millennia. And it does not explain why the impulse to build in stone, to build big, to build permanently, appears to emerge at roughly similar periods across the globe, as though a switch was flipped somewhere in human consciousness. 400 pyramids in China, 40,000 dolmens in Korea, thousands of megalithic circles in Africa, the same impulse, the same monumental ambition, the same architectural DNA, appearing on every continent, in cultures that never met, Mainstream archaeology calls this convergence. But here is the thing about convergence. It explains similarity in function. It does not explain similarity in precision. And precision is exactly what we find when we point a laser at the oldest structures on Earth. Because the alignments these buildings make with the sky are so accurate that they should have been impossible to achieve without instruments that did not exist yet. Chapter 6. Aligned to the stars. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned to true north with an accuracy of better than 4 minutes of arc. That is less than 1/15 of a single degree. The base of the pyramid is level to within 1 centimeter across 230 meters. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height encodes the mathematical constant pi with remarkable precision. And no engineering documents, no architectural plans, no written instructions have ever been found explaining how any of this was achieved. In 2018, Harvard archaeologist Glenn Dash proposed that the ancient Egyptians could have used the autumnal equinox shadow method, tracking the tip of a shadow cast by a vertical rod called a gnomon as the sun moved across the sky on the equinox. The method works. It produces an error profile that matches the pyramid's actual deviation from true north. It is elegant and plausible, but it still requires precise observation sustained over extended periods, flawless record-keeping, and perfect execution at a scale that staggers the imagination. This was not a small monument. The Great Pyramid contains an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, with a combined weight of roughly 6 million tons. Every block had to be placed in alignment with the master plan. Every course had to maintain the orientation. Over decades of construction, the accuracy could not be allowed to drift. And the Great Pyramid is not alone. It is not even unusual. Across the world, across millennia, across cultures that had no apparent contact with each other, we find the same thing. Monumental structures aligned to the sky with precision that seems to exceed the technological capability of the builders. At Newgrange in Ireland, built around 3,200 years before the Common Era, a narrow passageway is oriented so precisely that on the morning of the winter solstice, and only the winter solstice, a beam of sunlight penetrates the full length of the corridor and illuminates the inner chamber. The alignment required planning before a single stone was laid. The builders had to know the exact angle of the winter solstice sunrise, calculate the trajectory of the light beam through a corridor that narrows and rises as it extends, and then execute the construction so that the alignment would work not just approximately, but exactly. 5,000 years later, it still works. At Chichen Itza in Mexico, the Temple of Kukulkan, known as El Castillo, produces a shadow effect during the spring and autumn equinoxes that creates the illusion of a feathered serpent descending the staircase. The play of light and shadow was not accidental. It was engineered into the geometry of the building. The angles of the stairs, the height of the platforms, the orientation of the structure were all calibrated to produce this specific visual effect on these specific days. At Angkor Wat in Cambodia, built in the 12th century of the Common Era, the entire temple complex is aligned to the spring equinox sunrise. The sun rises directly over the central tower on that morning, framed by the surrounding architecture as if the building were a giant viewfinder aimed at the sky. But some researchers have noted something stranger. The layout of the temple complex mirrors the constellation Draco as it appeared around 10,500 years before the Common Era, thousands of years before the temple was built. The alignment to the contemporary sky is exact. The correspondence to an ancient sky is provocative. At Abu Simbel in Egypt, the sun illuminates the inner sanctum of the temple on exactly 2 days per year. Those days correspond to the birthday and coronation day of Pharaoh Ramesses II. The temple is carved into a cliff face, and the alignment is so precise that the light reaches the innermost chamber, 80 feet from the entrance, and falls directly on the statue of Ramesses, while leaving the statue of the god of the underworld in shadow. At the Karnak temple complex, also in Egypt, The rising sun on the winter solstice shines directly between two pillars and penetrates the entire length of the temple axis. The effect is dramatic and clearly intentional. At Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, the ancestral Puebloan people created the Sun Dagger, a spiral petroglyph positioned so that wedge-shaped beams of sunlight pierce it at both the summer and winter solstices. The alignment works because of the precise positioning of large rock slabs that filter the light. These alignments are not approximate. They are not close enough. They are accurate to fractions of a degree. They required astronomical knowledge accumulated over generations and engineering execution that allowed zero error at monumental scale. Now, consider the pattern. Cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other, separated by oceans and millennia, all built monumental structures aligned to the same astronomical events: solstices, equinoxes, cardinal directions, the sun, the moon, and specific stars. The knowledge required for these alignments is identical. The execution is identical. The architectural ambition is identical. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. All agricultural societies depend on seasonal timing. Knowing when to plant and when to harvest is a matter of survival. Astronomical observation is a natural development for any culture that relies on agriculture. Every farming society on Earth would independently discover that the sun rises in different positions throughout the year, that the solstices mark the extremes, and that these events can be predicted. This is true, and it explains the motivation. But it does not explain the precision. Tracking the solstice to know when to plant is one thing. You can do that with a stick and a rock and a few years of observation. Aligning a 2.3 million block pyramid to true north within 1/15 of a degree is something else entirely. Building a corridor at Newgrange that channels a beam of light for 17 minutes on a single morning of the year is something else. Engineering a shadow serpent that only appears on the equinoxes is something else. The gap between functional astronomical knowledge and the precision we observe in these structures is enormous. It is the gap between knowing what time the sun sets and building a clock accurate to the millisecond. Both involve tracking the sun, but one requires orders of magnitude more sophistication than the other. Every culture that built monuments aligned them to the stars, every one, with the same precision, across oceans, across millennia. Either humanity independently invented identical precision astronomy a dozen separate times, or the knowledge was older than any single culture, older and shared. And there is one artifact that proves, beyond any debate, that the ancients possessed technological sophistication we did not rediscover for 2,000 years. It was found in a shipwreck. It was covered in barnacles, and it took a century to figure out what it was. Chapter 7: The World's First Computer. In the spring of 1901, a group of Greek sponge divers was working off the coast of a small island called Antikythera, tucked between the southern tip of the Peloponnese and the island of Crete. They were not looking for treasure, they were looking for sponges. But what they found in the murky water, roughly 60 meters below the surface, was a shipwreck. A Roman-era vessel that had gone down sometime in the 1st century before the Common Era, loaded with bronze and marble statues, pottery, glasswork, and one object that would take the better part of a century to understand. Among the corroded bronze artifacts pulled from the wreck was a lump, a calcified, barnacle-encrusted mass of metal roughly the size of a shoebox. It did not look like much. Early researchers catalogued it and moved on to the more impressive finds. It sat in storage at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens for years, before anyone looked closely enough to see the gears. Gears, interlocking bronze gears with triangular teeth, layered in a complex mechanical arrangement. Over 30 of them, fitted together with a precision that suggested purpose, design, engineering of a very high order. It was not a decorative object, it was a machine. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be known, is the oldest known analog computer in the world. Dating to the 2nd century before the Common Era, it is a hand-cranked mechanical device that could predict solar and lunar eclipses, track the positions of the sun and moon against the background of stars, calculate the timing of the ancient Olympic Games, and model the irregular motion of the moon using a sophisticated gear train that accounted for the moon's elliptical orbit. The mechanism used a system of epicyclic gearing, gears mounted on gears that rotate on different axes, to reproduce the apparent motion of celestial bodies as seen from Earth. This is not simple engineering. This is applied celestial mechanics translated into bronze. The person or people who designed it needed to understand the mathematics of planetary motion, the geometry of eclipses, the irregularities of lunar velocity, and the mechanical principles required to model these phenomena in metal. For decades, the mechanism defied full understanding. X-ray imaging in the 1970s revealed more of the internal structure. CT scanning in the 2000s exposed details invisible to earlier technology. And in 2024, researchers at the University of Glasgow applied a technique you would never expect to see in the context of ancient artifacts: Bayesian statistical analysis. The same mathematical methods developed for the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, known as LIGO, which detects ripples in spacetime caused by colliding black holes. Professor Graham Wone and Dr. Joseph Bailey of Glasgow's School of Physics and Astronomy used these methods to analyze a broken ring on the mechanism's calendar dial. The ring had been damaged, and only fragments survived, making it impossible to directly count the number of holes drilled around its circumference. The question mattered because the number of holes would tell you what calendar the ring tracked. Their analysis showed that the ring almost certainly contained 354 or 355 holes, corresponding to the Greek lunar calendar. This was vastly more probable than 365 holes, which would have followed the Egyptian solar calendar, and hundreds of times more probable than 360 holes, which earlier research had suggested. The paper was published in the Horological Journal in July 2024. The result confirmed what the device's designers had achieved: a mechanical tracking of the Greek lunar year, accurate enough that the positioning of each individual hole required what Bailey described as highly accurate measurement techniques and an incredibly steady hand. The precision of the craftsmanship was extraordinary, even by modern standards. As Wone noted, it was a neat symmetry that techniques developed to study the universe today helped illuminate a device used to track the heavens nearly 2,000 years ago. But in 2025, a competing study from the University of Mar del Plata in Argentina introduced a complication. Using computer simulations, the researchers argued that the mechanism's triangular gear teeth may have caused jamming during operation, suggesting it might have been a symbolic or demonstrative object rather than a functioning practical instrument. The debate is live and fierce. Whether the Antikythera mechanism was a working tool or a masterwork of theoretical engineering does not diminish its implications. Either way, someone in the ancient world had the knowledge to design it, the skill to build it, and the mathematical understanding to make it work on paper, if not in practice. And here is what makes the Antikythera mechanism so haunting. Nothing comparable appears in the archaeological record for another 1,400 years. There is no evolutionary chain of devices leading up to it. There is no series of progressively more complex prototypes. It appears in the record as a fully realized, extraordinarily sophisticated instrument. And then, it vanishes. The knowledge that produced it, the tradition of precision gear-making and applied astronomical computation, left exactly one surviving example and then disappeared. The mechanism was found by accident in a shipwreck. If that ship had not sunk, if it had completed its voyage and delivered its cargo, the mechanism would presumably have been used, maintained for a time, and eventually recycled for its bronze, as countless other ancient artifacts were. we would never have known it existed. How many other devices of comparable sophistication were built? We do not know. The archaeological record preserves a vanishingly small fraction of what existed. Bronze was valuable. Broken machines were melted down. Libraries burned. Knowledge was lost. The Antikythera mechanism survived because it sank to the bottom of the sea, where salt water and sediment preserved it in a corroded but recognizable state for over 2,000 years. It survived by accident. The broader pattern reinforces the point. Consider Roman concrete, known as opus caementicium. Roman structures built with this material are stronger today than when they were poured. Modern material scientists spent years trying to understand why. In 2023, researchers discovered that the Romans deliberately included quickite, calcium clumps that enable self-healing when cracks form. Moisture seeps into a crack, reacts with the calcium, and produces new calcium carbonate that fills the gap. The concrete repairs itself. We only figured this out 2 years ago. The Romans knew it 2,000 years ago. The Antikythera mechanism remains, as one researcher put it, one of the strongest arguments against the idea that the ancient world was primitive. It is concrete, undeniable proof that we have consistently underestimated what was possible in the deep past. And the pattern of underestimation is accelerating, because a technology that did not exist 10 years ago is now revealing hidden cities we never knew about. Entire civilizations buried under jungle canopy, invisible to every survey ever conducted, until someone pointed a laser at them from the sky. Chapter 8. The Cities We Could Not See. In 2024, a doctoral student named Luke Auld Thomas was sitting at his computer at Tulane University in New Orleans, scrolling through the deep pages of a Google search. Not the first page. Not the 5th page. Page 16. He was looking for publicly available LiDAR data, laser surveys conducted from aircraft that can map the ground beneath dense vegetation by firing thousands of laser pulses per second and measuring the reflections. LiDAR strips away the canopy digitally, revealing what lies underneath. On that 16th page, Auld Thomas found a decade-old Mexican environmental monitoring survey. It had been conducted in 2013 by a program called Alianza M-Red Plus, designed to measure carbon levels in Mexico's forests. Nobody involved in the survey had been looking for archaeology. The data had been sitting in a public database for over 10 years, and hidden inside it was an entire city. The city lay in the state of Campeche on the Yucatan Peninsula, swallowed by dense tropical rainforest. It had been invisible to every previous survey. Aerial photography missed it. Satellite imagery missed it. Ground expeditions that had passed through the area missed it. For centuries, local farmers had been cultivating their fields among the ruins without knowing what lay beneath the soil and the trees. Auld Thomas and his advisor, Professor Marcelo Canuto, applied archaeological analysis methods to the LiDAR data. What emerged was staggering. Over 6,500 structures across roughly 130 square kilometers. Pyramids, plazas, an amphitheater, a ball court, a reservoir formed by damming a seasonal watercourse, causeways connecting multiple urban districts, all the hallmarks of a major Maya political capital. They named it Valeriana, after a nearby freshwater lagoon. At its peak, between roughly 740 and 850 of the Common Era, it may have housed 30,000 to 50,000 people, more than the region's population today. The findings were published in the journal Antiquity in October 2024, as Auld Thomas told reporters. The government never knew about it. The scientific community never knew about it. That really puts an exclamation point behind the statement that no, we have not found everything. And yes, there is a lot more to be discovered. A major regional capital, with pyramids, next to a modern highway. And nobody knew it was there until a graduate student found it on page 16 of a Google search using decade-old data that was never intended for archaeology. But Valeriana was just one discovery in a cascade that is rewriting the textbooks in real time. In January 2024, Stefan Rostaing of the French National Center for Scientific Research published findings from the Upano Valley in Ecuador's Amazon basin that shattered one of the most persistent assumptions in archaeology, the assumption that the Amazon was a pristine wilderness, untouched by large-scale human settlement. Rostaing had been excavating in the Upano Valley on foot for 40 years. For 4 decades, colleagues told him there was nothing to find. The Amazon was too dense, too wet, too hostile for complex civilization. Then he pointed LiDAR at it. The laser surveys revealed an ancient urban complex with large earthen mounds up to 150 meters long and 8 meters high, connected by extensive road networks and surrounded by agricultural terraces. Dating placed the complex at roughly 2,500 years old. The scale was comparable to classic Maya cities. The findings were published in the journal Science. The implications were profound. The Amazon was not an untouched wilderness. It was a managed, engineered landscape supporting large populations. And in February 2025, additional LiDAR surveys across the broader Amazon basin revealed thousands of previously unknown earthworks, geometric enclosures, roads, agricultural features spanning vast areas. Vinicius Peripato of the Brazilian National Institute for Space Research is leading efforts to scan the entire Amazon basin. Early results suggest the scale of pre-Columbian settlement in the Amazon has been underestimated by an order of magnitude. An order of magnitude. That means the real number could be 10 times what we assumed, 10 times the population, 10 times the settlement area, 10 times the engineering. Hidden under tree canopy for 500 years, invisible to every technique we had until LiDAR came along. And if you think the Amazon is a special case, consider this. In 2024 and 2025, drone-mounted LiDAR at Machu Picchu, one of the most studied archaeological sites on the planet, visited by millions of tourists annually, revealed 12 previously unknown structures hidden beneath dense jungle growth near the main citadel. The work was led by Dominika Sieckowska of the University of Warsaw. 12 structures. At Machu Picchu, a site that has been photographed from every angle, walked by millions of visitors, surveyed by professionals for over a century. And there were 12 buildings nobody knew about, sitting right there under the vegetation, waiting for someone to point a laser at them. The nearby Chalcobamba Ceremonial Complex, less than 5 miles from Machu Picchu, was found to contain an intricate network of underground stone water channels, a hydraulic system more sophisticated than anything previously documented at the site. The Inca were even better engineers than we thought, and we only found out because of technology that did not exist in archaeological use a decade ago. LiDAR is rewriting the textbooks in real time. Every time we point it at dense jungle, we find cities. Every time. The Maya were bigger than we thought. The Amazon was urbanized. Machu Picchu was more complex, and the technology is barely a decade old in archaeological use. We are at the very beginning of a revolution in understanding the ancient world. But LiDAR can only see what is on land. It cannot see what is underwater, and it cannot see what was deliberately buried. Like what we are finding right now, at the site that started it all. The site we talked about in our last documentary, the site that broke the model of human history. It turns out, that site was not alone. It was part of a network, and the network is bigger than anyone imagined. Chapter 9. The Stone Hills are waking up. In our last documentary, we spent considerable time at Göbekli Tepe, the temple that should not exist. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars carved with intricate animal reliefs, arranged in circles, built roughly 11,500 years ago by people who supposedly had no agriculture, no pottery, no metal tools, and no permanent settlements. A site that reversed the accepted sequence of civilization. The temple came before the farm. At the time, We presented Göbekli Tepe as an anomaly, a singular exception that challenged the conventional timeline. Tonight we have to correct that, because Göbekli Tepe is not an anomaly. It is not singular. It is not an exception. It is one node in a network, and the network is still growing. 35 kilometers east of Göbekli Tepe, on a limestone plateau overlooking the plains of southeastern Turkey, lies Karahan Tepe. The Turkish government's Stone Hills project, known in Turkish as Taştepeler, has been excavating the site since the early 2020s under the direction of Professor Necmi Karul of Istanbul University. And what they are finding there is not simply confirming what Göbekli Tepe taught us. It is expanding the story in directions nobody anticipated. Karahan Tepe dates from roughly 9,400 to 8,000 years before the Common Era. It was inhabited for approximately 1,500 years. Like Göbekli Tepe, it features T-shaped monolithic pillars. Like Göbekli Tepe, it contains elaborate animal carvings. But unlike Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe reveals a more complex built environment carved directly into the bedrock. Where Göbekli Tepe's enclosures are circular and freestanding, Karahan Tepe's structures include rooms hewn from the living rock, creating an architecture that blends construction and excavation in ways not seen at the older site. The discoveries have been extraordinary. A human statue standing 2.45 meters tall, roughly 8 feet, was found at the site. It is the largest known sculpture from the pre-pottery Neolithic period. The figure features realistic facial details, a level of artistic sophistication that was not supposed to exist at this date. Massive T-shaped obelisks, similar to those at Göbekli Tepe, stand within the enclosures. Carved human heads with lifelike expressions emerge from pillars and walls, creating the eerie effect of stone people watching from the rock. In October 2025, archaeologists at Karahan Tepe made a discovery that sent ripples through the academic world. They unearthed the first ever human face carved onto a T-shaped pillar. A face with a prominent nose, deep-set eyes, and a sharp, angular jawline, staring out from a standing stone, 135 centimeters tall. Excavation director Necmi Karul confirmed the find, which added a new dimension to our understanding of how these ancient people represented themselves and their world. And the most recently excavated areas revealed what may be the oldest known staircase ever found. Carved from stone and integrated into the site's architecture, it suggests that the spaces at Karahan Tepe were not only symbolic, but intentionally designed for navigation. People moved through these spaces in planned ways. The architecture directed their movement. This implies a level of spatial design thinking that goes far beyond what was previously attributed to cultures of this period. But Karahan Tepe is just one piece of the expanding puzzle. The Taştepeler project has identified at least 12 related sites in the Şanlıurfa region of southeastern Turkey, all dating to the pre-pottery Neolithic period, roughly 10,000 to 8,000 years before the Common Era. This is not one anomalous temple. It is a civilization-scale network of monumental sites spanning over 200 kilometers. At Sayburk, another site in the network, archaeologists uncovered a relief depicting a human figure grasping a leopard. A newly revealed statue is beginning to expand the picture of figurative art across the region. At Sefertepe, in November 2025, researchers announced the discovery of 2 carved human faces on neatly dressed stone blocks, one in high relief and one in low relief. The stylistic differences between the Sefertepe faces and those at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe suggest that each site developed its own local sculptural tradition within a shared cultural framework. At the same announcement, Turkish Minister of Culture and Tourism Mehmet Nuri Ersoy revealed another unexpected find from Sefertepe, a double-sided human motif carved into a black serpentinite bead. 2 faces emerging from opposite sides of a polished stone, crafted with a delicacy that implies sophisticated portable art, was being produced alongside the monumental works. Meanwhile, discoveries at Göbekli Tepe itself continue. In 2025, excavators found a 12,000-year-old human statue embedded inside a wall. A painted wild boar sculpture decorated with red, white, and black pigment, making it one of the oldest known painted sculptures in the world. The statue sat on a bench decorated with H-shaped symbols, crescents, snakes, and human faces. Evidence of grinding mills, flint sickles, and plant residues now suggests the builders may have been engaging in early food processing or proto-agriculture, further blurring the line between hunter-gatherer and farmer. The world is beginning to pay attention. An exhibition titled Göbekli Tepe, The Mystery of a Sacred Place, held at the Colosseum in Rome from October 2024 through March 2025, drew 6 million visitors. In February 2026, a new exhibition called Myths in Stone opened at the James Simon Gallery in Berlin, exploring life at Göbekli Tepe and the Tas Tepeler sites 12,000 years ago. Additional exhibitions are planned for the United Kingdom in 2026 and the Tokyo National Museum in 2027. What the Tas Tepeler network tells us is this: 12,000 years ago, the region that is now southeastern Turkey supported a population capable of building monumental stone complexes across a wide area. They maintained a shared symbolic language, the T pillars, the animal carvings, the H symbols. They sustained this tradition for centuries. They produced art of astonishing sophistication. They designed architectural spaces with intention and precision. And they did all of this before they had agriculture in the traditional sense. The question from our last documentary: if hunter-gatherers could build Göbekli Tepe, what else could they do? Now has a partial answer. They could build at least a dozen sites like it across an entire region, with shared architecture and shared symbols sustained over millennia, and the project is barely a decade old. Less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe itself has been excavated. Whatever is still buried under those hills could take a century to fully uncover. But we do not have to wait to ask the real question. Because the pattern we have been tracking, the impossible stones, the drowned coastlines, the astronomical alignments, the hidden cities, all of it points in one direction. And that direction is not comfortable. It suggests that what we call the beginning of civilization was not a beginning at all. It was a restart. Chapter 10. The Restart Hypothesis. Let us pause and lay out everything we have seen so far, not as individual curiosities, not as separate mysteries filed under different headings in different disciplines, but as a single body of evidence viewed from a single vantage point. In Lebanon, 3 stones weighing 800 tons each are fitted together 7 meters above the ground with razor precision. Nearby, a quarried block weighing 1,650 tons sits in the quarry, partially cut, evidence that whoever began the work intended to move it and had a method. The greatest engineers of the Roman world built on top of this platform, but never replicated the megalithic work beneath it. In Peru, granite walls interlock like 3-dimensional puzzles without mortar, some showing vitrification at temperatures exceeding 1100 degrees Celsius. The Inca themselves said they did not build these walls. They said the gods did. In Bolivia, at 12,800 feet, andesite blocks, one of the hardest stones on Earth, feature machine precision cuts, standardized modular components, and drill holes of uniform spacing, produced with no known metal tools and no written plans. Under the Baltic Sea, a 10,000-year-old stone wall stretches nearly a kilometer across the seabed, built by a population we estimate at fewer than 5,000 people. Under the Atlantic, off Brittany, a 7,000-year-old granite wall weighing 3,300 tons rests 9 meters underwater. Off Japan, a massive terraced structure sits 25 meters below the Pacific, possibly built when the site was still dry land during the last ice age. Beneath the North Sea, the lost continent of Doggerland has been shown through sedimentary ancient DNA to have supported temperate forests and habitable environments 16,000 years ago, thousands of years earlier than assumed. A city, described by Herodotus, Thonis Heraklion, vanished so completely that scholars questioned its existence, only to be found 4 miles offshore under 30 feet of water. Over 400 pyramids cluster around Xi'an in China. 40,000 dolmens crowd the Korean peninsula. Thousands of stone circles dot the African Sahel. Dolmens of strikingly similar design appear on every inhabited continent. The Great Pyramid aligns to true north within 1/15 of a degree. Newgrange channels a beam of light into its inner chamber on a single morning per year. Chichen Itza produces a shadow serpent on the equinoxes. Angkor Wat mirrors a constellation's position from 10,500 years before it was built. The Antikythera mechanism, a hand-cranked computer from the 2nd century before the Common Era, tracked the Greek lunar calendar with precision that stunned 21st century physicists, who analyzed it with gravitational wave detection methods. Nothing comparable appeared for 1,400 years after it was built. LiDAR has revealed a lost Maya megacity of over 6,000 structures in Campeche that nobody knew about. The Amazon, long assumed to be pristine wilderness, turns out to have been an urbanized, engineered landscape. Machu Picchu, the most studied site in the Americas, was hiding 12 undiscovered buildings under the vegetation. And in southeastern Turkey, the network of pre-pottery Neolithic sites known as Tas Tepeler now includes at least 12 monumental complexes with shared symbolic language, sophisticated sculpture, and architectural planning, all predating agriculture by centuries or millennia. This is the evidence. Not one anomaly, not a handful, a pattern. A global pattern spanning 6 continents and tens of thousands of years. The conventional archaeological framework handles each of these individually. Baalbek was Roman, Sacsayhuaman was Kilka or Inca, Puma Punku was Tiwanaku. The Blinker Wall was built by Mesolithic hunters. The pyramids at Giza were 4th dynasty Egyptian. Göbekli Tepe was an exceptionally capable community of hunter-gatherers. Each explanation, taken on its own terms, is reasonable, supported by evidence, internally consistent. But the anomalies are accumulating faster than the conventional framework can absorb them. Every year brings new discoveries that push the timeline of human capability further back. Every year, the geographic scope of monumental construction expands. Every year, we find something we were told could not exist. The alternative framework, presented here as hypothesis and not as fact, looks like this. What if there was a broadly distributed pre-Ice Age knowledge tradition? Not necessarily a single empire. Not necessarily a centralized civilization in the modern sense, but a network of connected cultures sharing maritime technology, astronomical knowledge, and monumental construction techniques. A network that thrived along coastlines when sea levels were 120 meters lower than today. When the Ice Age ended catastrophically, sea levels rose. The Younger Dryas event, which we covered in detail in our last documentary, may have been triggered or intensified by a cosmic impact roughly 12,800 years ago. The coastlines drowned. The knowledge survived in fragments, carried inland by survivors, encoded in stone at sites like Göbekli Tepe, transmitted orally through flood myths, preserved in astronomical alignments designed to last millennia. The restart did not come from nowhere. It came from people who remembered what was lost and tried to rebuild. This is the story that writers like Graham Hancock have told for decades, and it is a story that mainstream science overwhelmingly rejects. The rejection is not unreasonable. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the evidence, while suggestive, is circumstantial. There are no pre-Ice Age cities, no pre-Ice Age writing, no pre-Ice Age tools that unambiguously demonstrate advanced technology. But the mainstream has also quietly shifted. Göbekli Tepe forced a rewrite of the Neolithic timeline. The Amazon LiDAR discoveries forced a rewrite of pre-Columbian history. The Blinker Wall forced a rewrite of European prehistory. The Sphinx erosion debate, which we covered in our last documentary, remains unresolved. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis has gained ground with new crater evidence and sediment analysis. The honest position is this: we do not know. The evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. The conventional explanations are reasonable but increasingly strained. And the places where the conclusive evidence would be, the drowned continental shelves, have not been searched. The restart hypothesis is not proven. It may never be. But here is what is proven. We are discovering things faster than we can explain them. The past is bigger, stranger, and more sophisticated than anyone imagined even 10 years ago. And the deepest mystery, the one that connects all the others, is not about any single site or artifact. It is about a pattern that shows up in places we have never connected before. And the clearest expression of that pattern is not in stone or metal or myth. It is in geometry. Chapter 11. The geometry nobody taught them. The Great Pyramid of Giza encodes the mathematical constant pi. If you take the perimeter of the base and divide it by twice the height, you get 3.1416. The ratio is accurate to 4 decimal places. The proportions of the King's Chamber encode phi, the golden ratio, 1.618, a number that appears throughout nature in the spiral of a nautilus shell, the branching of trees, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. These mathematical relationships are embedded in the physical structure of the building, not written on a wall, not described in a papyrus, built into the stone itself. Now, you could argue that these ratios are coincidental, that a pyramid of certain proportions will inevitably approximate pi simply because of the geometry involved. And there is some truth to that. If the Egyptians chose their slope angle based on a simple ratio of rise to run, pi could emerge as an unintended byproduct. The debate over whether the encoding was deliberate or accidental has continued for over a century and may never be resolved. But the Great Pyramid is not the only ancient structure that displays sophisticated geometric principles. At Göbekli Tepe, computer modeling published in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal revealed that the 3 main enclosures are connected by an equilateral triangle. The entire complex was conceived as a unified geometric design. This was not a series of separate structures added over time. It was planned from the beginning as a coherent layout. The builders used ropes to measure distances and establish precise angles. They worked with geometric principles that imply abstract mathematical thinking of a kind not previously attributed to cultures of this period. At Puma Punku, the standardized H-blocks represent something even more striking: interchangeable modular components. Blocks designed from a master template with tolerances tight enough that any block can substitute for any other. This implies not just geometry, but a system of measurement, a standard unit, a way of ensuring that work done by different hands at different times conformed to a single specification. In modern manufacturing, this is called quality control. At Puma Punku, it was achieved with stone tools. The Orion correlation theory, proposed by Robert Bauval in the 1990s, suggests that the 3 pyramids at Giza mirror the 3 stars of Orion's belt. The alignment is not perfect when compared to the modern sky. The match is imprecise. But Bauval calculated that the closest correspondence occurs when you map the sky as it appeared around 10,500 years before the Common Era, when the constellation Orion was at its lowest point in the precessional cycle. The same date that the Sphinx, if it were carved as a lion, would have faced its own constellation, Leo, rising on the eastern horizon at the spring equinox. This brings us to precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over a cycle of approximately 25,920 years. Because of precession, the constellation visible on the eastern horizon at sunrise on the equinox changes over time. A full cycle takes nearly 26,000 years. Tracking precession requires sustained astronomical observation over not just decades or centuries, but millennia. You need generational record keeping. You need a way to compare the sky your great-great-grandparents saw with the sky you see today, and with the sky your great-great-grandchildren will see. Giorgio de Santillana and Herta von Dechend, in their landmark 1969 book, Hamlet's Mill, argued that knowledge of precession was encoded in the myths and legends of cultures around the world. They identified recurring numerical motifs: 72, 108, 432, 2,160, 25,920. Numbers that relate to the precessional cycle and that appear in mythological and religious traditions from Mesopotamia to India to Scandinavia to Mesoamerica. If their analysis is correct, it implies that precessional knowledge was ancient, widespread, and transmitted through narrative rather than writing. A library of astronomical data, encoded in story form and passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years. This is speculative. Mainstream astronomy does not accept that precessional knowledge existed before the Greek astronomer Hipparchus, who is credited with discovering precession around 130 before the Common Era. But the alignments at Giza, the correspondences at Angkor Wat, and the numerical patterns in global mythology create a provocative circumstantial case that the knowledge may be far older. And then there is polygonal masonry. This is the technique of fitting irregularly shaped stones together without mortar so tightly that nothing penetrates the joints. Each stone is uniquely shaped. No two are alike, and yet they fit together as if molded against each other, with surfaces that are smooth, flush, and interlocked in ways that distribute load and resist earthquake damage with remarkable effectiveness. Polygonal masonry appears at Sacsayhuaman in Peru. It appears at Delphi in Greece. It appears in the walls of Alatri in central Italy. It appears at Hattusa, the ancient Hittite capital in Turkey. And it appears on Easter Island, thousands of miles from anywhere, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. These cultures span 4,000 years and multiple continents. The Inca, the Greeks, the Italic peoples, the Hittites, the Rapa Nui. They spoke different languages. They worshipped different gods. They had different tools, different social structures, different levels of technological development. And yet the technique, the same technique of fitting irregular polygonal blocks into earthquake-resistant mortarless walls, with surfaces finished to near identical standards, appears at all of these sites. Mainstream archaeology explains this as convergent engineering. Stone is stone. Certain cutting and fitting techniques are structurally optimal. Irregularly shaped blocks interlock more effectively than rectangular ones. Multiple cultures could independently discover this. And maybe they did. Maybe the polygonal technique is simply the best solution to a universal problem, and any culture working with stone for long enough will arrive at it. That is a reasonable explanation. But the degree of similarity, down to the surface finish, the jointing angles, the handling of corners and curves, the aesthetic character of the walls, goes beyond functional convergence. It looks less like independent invention and more like different workshops following the same manual, the same geometry, the same precision, the same construction techniques on every continent. Mainstream archaeology calls it convergent evolution, and maybe it is. But there is one more piece of evidence, one that only became visible in the last few years, that makes convergent evolution very hard to defend. Because we just discovered that the Cappadocian underground cities, the ones we talked about in our last documentary, are not alone. There are more, many more, and the newest one might be the largest underground structure ever found on Earth. Chapter 12. Going Deeper. In our last documentary, we descended into Derinkuyu, the underground city in the Cappadocia region of Turkey. 18 levels deep, ventilation shafts, water wells, storage rooms, stables, meeting halls, chapels, massive circular stone doors that could seal corridors from the inside, protecting up to 20,000 people from whatever threatened the surface above. We presented Derinkuyu as extraordinary. Tonight we have to recalibrate. Because Derinkuyu is not extraordinary for Cappadocia. Derinkuyu is normal for Cappadocia. The entire region is honeycombed with underground settlements. Over 200 of them are known. Some are small, just 2 or 3 levels deep. Others rival Derinkuyu in depth and complexity. And new ones are still being discovered. In 2015, during a housing project near the town of Nevşehir, construction crews broke through into something beneath a hilltop castle. What they found stopped the project permanently. An underground city that initial surveys suggested extends over 100 meters deep and covers nearly 5 million square feet. If those estimates hold, the Nevşehir underground city is larger than Derinkuyu, potentially the largest underground structure ever discovered by human beings. The Turkish government halted the housing development and designated the entire area for archaeological investigation. Less than half of the site has been explored. Entire sections remain sealed, either because of structural concerns or because nobody has yet ventured into them. What lies in those sealed sections is unknown, and the full extent of the complex may not be mapped for decades. The engineering of these underground cities deserves closer scrutiny than it typically receives. Derinkuyu and its neighbors are carved from tufa, a relatively soft volcanic rock produced by ancient eruptions in the region. Tufa can be shaped with basic tools. That much is true, but the design sophistication goes far beyond carving capability. The ventilation systems are masterworks of environmental engineering. Networks of shafts run from the deepest levels to the surface, providing fresh, breathable air throughout the complex. Some of these shafts doubled as wells, reaching the water table and delivering drinking water to inhabitants who might be sealed underground for weeks or months. The air circulation was so well designed that even at the lowest levels, the atmosphere remained stable. No mechanical fans, no powered extraction, just geometry and physics, applied with extraordinary precision. Each level could be sealed independently. If the upper floors were breached by attackers, the population could retreat deeper, rolling massive stone doors across corridor entrances behind them. The doors could not be opened from the outside. The narrow corridors ensured that invaders would have to advance single file, where defenders could engage them one at a time. Every floor was a self-contained defensive position with its own water supply and air circulation. This is not improvisation. This is military engineering, strategic thinking refined over generations. The work of people who had survived attacks before and intended to survive them again. The conventional dating places the earliest excavation of the Cappadocian underground cities in the Phrygian era, roughly 2,800 years ago. The Phrygians, who inhabited central Anatolia in the 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era, are credited with beginning the process. Later cultures, particularly Byzantine Christians, fleeing persecution and Arab raids, expanded the complexes dramatically. But there are unresolved questions. The deepest portions of Derinkuyu and other sites show no Phrygian artifacts. The stonework at the lowest levels is different from the upper levels. The design philosophy appears distinct. Some researchers have proposed that the deepest and most ancient portions may be significantly older than the Phrygian era, with later cultures simply expanding on a foundation that was already there. This is difficult to prove. Underground environments are notoriously challenging for dating. Organic material suitable for radiocarbon analysis is scarce. The stratigraphy is complicated by centuries of reuse and modification, but the question persists. If the Phrygians started the excavation, why are there no Phrygian artifacts in the deepest levels? And why does the engineering at the bottom feel different from the engineering at the top? Now, Cappadocia is remarkable, but it is not unique. Underground structures of similar ambition have been found in other parts of the world, and some of them are even more mysterious. In southeastern China, near the village of Longyu in Zhejiang province, There is a complex of 24 hand-carved caverns discovered in 1992. The discovery was accidental. A local villager named Wu Anai decided to pump the water out of what he and his neighbors had always assumed were natural ponds. As the water level dropped, walls emerged, then pillars, then ceilings. The ponds were not natural. They were the flooded remains of an enormous underground excavation. The Longyu Caves cover more than 30,000 square meters. Ceilings reach up to 30 meters high. The interior surfaces are covered in parallel grooves, uniform and consistent across every wall and ceiling, suggesting a systematic carving technique applied with mechanical regularity. The volume of rock removed is estimated at nearly 1 million cubic meters. To put that in context, that is enough rock to fill roughly 400 Olympic swimming pools. And nobody knows who built them. No historical record mentions their construction. No artifacts have been found inside that could identify the builders. No inscriptions, no tools, no pottery, nothing. The caves do not appear in any Chinese historical text, which is remarkable given that China has one of the most extensive written records of any civilization on Earth. Someone carved 1 million cubic meters of rock from beneath the ground, removed it, and left no trace of who they were or why they did it. The conventional dating suggests the Longyu Caves may be around 2,000 years old, based on the geological context and the style of the carving. But the absence of any historical record is deeply unusual for that period. Chinese record-keeping during the Han Dynasty was meticulous. An excavation of this scale should have been documented somewhere. The broader pattern is what matters. Over 200 underground cities in one region of Turkey, a potentially enormous new complex at Nevşehir, barely explored. The Longyu Caves in China with no historical record whatsoever. These represent a recurring human response to a recurring human fear. When the surface is not safe, go down. When the sky is dangerous, seek the rock. When everything above ground can be destroyed, build beneath it. And all of it, every underground structure, every drowned coastline, every jungle-hidden city, every impossible stone wall, all of it converges on a single haunting realization about the kind of species we are. We build. We build to survive. We build to remember. And we build to warn. That is where we are going next. Chapter 13. The Warning in the Stone. There is a pillar at Göbekli Tepe that has haunted researchers since the day it was uncovered. It is designated Pillar 43. It is also called the Vulture Stone, and what is carved into it may be the oldest warning in the world. The relief is complex. A vulture holds a round object, possibly a sphere or a head, in its wing. Below the vulture, a scorpion. Around these central figures, other animals and abstract symbols. The scene is dense with information. It does not look decorative. It looks deliberate. It looks like it is trying to say something. In 2017, researchers from the University of Edinburgh, led by Dr. Martin Sweatman, proposed an interpretation that changed the way many people look at Göbekli Tepe. They argued that the carved animals on Pillar 43 represent constellations. The vulture corresponds to Sagittarius. The scorpion corresponds to Scorpius. The round object held by the vulture represents the sun. And the scene as a whole depicts a specific moment in time. A date encoded in stone, using the positions of the stars as they would have appeared on the day in question. The date they calculated was approximately 10,950 years before the Common Era, right at the onset of the Younger Dryas, the catastrophic cold period that we covered in our last documentary. The event that coincided with megafaunal extinctions across multiple continents, the disappearance of the Clovis culture in North America, and a growing body of evidence suggesting a cosmic impact. If Sweatman's interpretation is correct, and it remains debated within the academic community, then Pillar 43 is not just a carving, it is a record, a memorial, a date stamp carved in stone, oriented to the sky, designed to be readable by anyone who understood the constellations. A civilization looking backward at its own catastrophe and encoding the moment in the only medium that endures deep time. Sweatman has continued this line of research. By 2025, he was arguing publicly that Göbekli Tepe functions as the world's oldest calendar, designed not merely to commemorate a past event, but to track astronomical cycles and potentially predict future catastrophic alignments. The site, in this reading, is not just a temple, it is an observatory, a warning system, a message from the past to the future. Carved in stone because stone is the only thing that lasts. Think about that for a moment. If you wanted to leave a message for a civilization 10,000 years in the future, how would you do it? Not with paper. Paper disintegrates in centuries, not with metal. Metal corrodes and gets recycled. Not with digital storage. Hard drives fail in decades. Electronic formats become obsolete in a generation. No one alive today can read an 8-track tape or a floppy disk, and those are only 50 years old. Stone is the only medium that survives geological time, and not just any stone, the hardest, most durable stone available: granite, andesite, limestone bedrock. Every culture that built monumental structures chose the most resistant material they could find. They quarried it, shaped it with agonizing precision, and placed it with tolerances that rival modern construction. Why? If the goal was simply shelter or worship, cruder construction would suffice. A thatched roof and a wooden frame will keep out the rain. A circle of rough stones will mark a sacred spot. You do not need 800-ton blocks fitted with razor precision to worship the sun. You do not need machine-cut andesite at 12,800 feet to bury your dead. You do not need a kilometer-long stone wall on the Baltic coast to hunt reindeer. The hypothesis, and it is only a hypothesis, is that at least some megalithic construction was designed for permanence as an end in itself, built to survive whatever came next. Built to persist through ice ages, floods, earthquakes, and the slow erosion of deep time. Built to be the one thing that could not be erased. If you were a survivor of a catastrophe, if your coastal cities had drowned, if your knowledge was fragmenting, if the people around you were forgetting what you still remembered, you would build in stone. You would align your structures to the stars so that the astronomical knowledge would be preserved in the architecture itself, readable by anyone who understood the sky. You would carve symbols and scenes that encoded critical information, and you would make your work as large, as precise, and as permanent as you possibly could, because the message had to last. Not for years, not for centuries, for millennia. And here is where the story takes an extraordinary modern turn. Engineers working on nuclear waste storage at the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico face an identical problem. Nuclear waste remains dangerous for 10,000 years. Current languages will not survive that long. Current symbols may lose their meaning. The question that the United States Department of Energy spent years and millions of dollars studying was this: how do you warn civilizations 10,000 years from now about buried danger? The conclusion was remarkable. You build massive, imposing, clearly artificial structures that communicate danger through their sheer scale and strangeness. Structures that look important even to people who cannot read your language or understand your symbols. You use the physical landscape itself as the message. They essentially proposed building a modern Göbekli Tepe, enormous stone markers, forbidding architecture, a site designed to scream, "Something happened here," without relying on words. The irony is almost too perfect. We are trying to figure out how to warn the future using the same method that someone may have used 12,000 years ago to warn us. The stone endures. The message survives, but only if someone is listening, only if someone is looking. And for most of our history, we were not looking. We assumed the past was primitive. We assumed the stones were just stones. We assumed the myths were just myths. But what if the past was trying to tell us something, And what if we were too confident in our own superiority to hear it? That confidence is crumbling. Every year brings new evidence that the ancient world was more sophisticated, more connected, and more capable than the previous generation of scholars assumed. Every year the timeline stretches further back. Every year the map of human achievement expands into territory that was supposed to be empty. And we are left with the same question we started with, sharper now, more urgent. What did they leave for us? And what are we leaving behind? Chapter 14. What they left for us. So here we are, at the end of the second journey, or perhaps just deeper into the first. We have walked through the ruins of Baalbek and stood before stones that weigh as much as the machinery we built to lift them. We have climbed to 12,800 feet on the Altiplano and looked at cuts in volcanic rock that no copper chisel should have been able to make. We have descended to the floor of the Baltic Sea, where a 10,000-year-old wall waited for a marine geologist to stumble upon it during a teaching exercise. We have dived off the coast of Brittany, where a 7,000-year-old granite wall sat beneath 9 meters of Atlantic water, invisible until someone thought to point a laser at the seabed. We have mapped a lost continent the size of 2 countries beneath the North Sea and learned from ancient DNA that it was not a frozen wasteland, but a forested, habitable homeland, drowned by a tsunami and the slow, relentless rise of the ocean. We have found cities under jungle canopy on 3 continents, cities that satellites could not see and ground surveys could not detect, revealed only by technology that did not exist a decade ago. We have watched as the stone hills of southeastern Turkey give up sculpture after sculpture, enclosure after enclosure, each one older and more sophisticated than the textbooks said was possible. We have held in our minds the image of a 2,000-year-old bronze machine, corroded and broken, pulled from a shipwreck by sponge divers that turned out to be a computer, a device that predicted eclipses and tracked the moon with a precision that required 21st century physics to fully appreciate. We have followed geometric patterns that repeat across continents and millennia, and we have stood before underground cities carved hundreds of feet into the earth by people whose names we will never know, for reasons we can only guess at. Now, we have to ask the question we have been building toward all night. What does all of this mean? Let us start with what we know for certain. We know that the conventional archaeological timeline is under siege from its own discoveries, not from conspiracy theories, not from pseudoscience. From peer-reviewed research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, in Antiquity, in the International Journal of Nautical Archaeology, in Science. Every year the timeline stretches. Every year the map of ancient capability expands. Every year something turns up that was not supposed to be there. We know that the submerged continental shelves of the Ice Age world, the coastlines where civilizations would most likely have developed, remain almost entirely unexplored. We have mapped less than we should. We have searched less than we could. And what little we have found, the Blinker Wall, the Brittany Megawall, Thonis Heraclean, Yonaguni, was found essentially by accident, not through systematic exploration, through luck. We know that LiDAR is revealing ancient urban landscapes at a pace that no one anticipated. The Maya lowlands, the Amazon basin, the Andes, every dense forest that gets scanned yields cities. The technology is barely a decade old in archaeological use. The next decade will produce discoveries we cannot yet imagine. We know that the Tas Tepeler network in Turkey has transformed Göbekli Tepe from an anomaly into a data point, one node in a civilization-scale complex of sites that shared symbolic language, architectural principles, and artistic traditions for over a millennium, all before agriculture existed in the traditional sense. We know that the Antikythera mechanism proves, beyond any debate, that we have consistently underestimated ancient technological capability. That device did not appear in isolation. It represents a tradition. And traditions leave more than one artifact. If we found one because a ship sank, How many were lost because they were melted down for bronze? And we know that none of this, taken individually or collectively, proves the existence of a lost advanced civilization. The conventional explanations for each anomaly remain reasonable. The stones at Baalbek could have been moved by enormous coordinated human effort. The precision at Puma Punku could have been achieved with patience and abrasion. The astronomical alignments could reflect independent observations by agricultural societies worldwide. The underwater structures could be the remnants of small coastal communities, not great cities. The geometric similarities could be convergent solutions to universal engineering problems. Each of these explanations works, in isolation, but the pattern, the relentless accumulation of things that are slightly harder to explain than they should be, sites that are slightly older than they should be, structures that are slightly more precise than they should be, knowledge that is slightly more sophisticated than it should be. The pattern demands attention. Here is what the Silurian hypothesis taught us in our last documentary. The Earth destroys evidence, systematically, relentlessly. Over millions of years, tectonic processes recycle the ocean floor. Erosion and sedimentation erase the surface. The geological record is incomplete and always will be. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Not on a planet that has been grinding, melting, subducting, and erasing for 4.5 billion years. And here is what this documentary has tried to show. The evidence that does survive, the stone, the alignments, the underwater ruins, the myths, is more extraordinary than we ever imagined. Whatever the builders of Baalbek and Puma Punku and Göbekli Tepe were doing, they were doing it with a sophistication that our textbooks are still catching up to. Whether this represents the output of unknown advanced civilizations or the underestimated capabilities of known ones, the conclusion is the same. We have gotten the past wrong, not in the details, in the scale, in the ambition, in the intelligence. And there is a message in that, because we are currently creating our own geological layer, the Anthropocene, microplastics in every ocean, radioactive isotopes in every ice core, a carbon spike in the atmosphere that will be visible in the rock for millions of years. We are writing our signature into the planet with a permanence that would impress even the builders of Baalbek. The question from our last documentary was, are we the first? The question from this one is, what did they leave behind? And what are we leaving behind? The stones of Göbekli Tepe are still standing because someone built them to last. Someone wanted the future to know they were here. Someone cared enough to leave a message in the only medium that survives deep time, stone. The pharaohs carved their names into granite because they wanted to be remembered. The builders of Göbekli Tepe created something so remarkable that it survived 12,000 years of burial. The people who told the flood myths passed their stories down through so many generations that the stories outlasted the civilizations that first told them. We remember what we choose to remember, and we forget what we fail to protect. So the next time you stand on a beach and watch the waves erase your footprints, or hold a handful of soil and think about all the life that has passed through it, or look up at the stars and wonder who else has looked at those same stars from this same planet, ask yourself 2 questions. If someone came before us, what were they trying to tell us? And if no one did, what do we want to leave for whoever comes next? If you enjoy deep investigations into science, history, and the mysteries of our past, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Tell us in the comments. If you could explore one site from tonight's documentary in person, which would it be? And if you had to leave a message in stone for a civilization 12,000 years from now, what would you carve? These are not just questions for scientists. They are questions for all of us. Because the past is not a closed book. It is an open dig, and every new discovery changes the story. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next investigation.